I submit to you that rejection isn't something we should be afraid of. And it sure isn't something that should make us get discouraged, depressed, or work unhealthy amounts of hours just to prove to the world that we are somebody worth loving and paying attention to. Rather, rejection is our friend and not our enemy.
She said no in front of the whole class and they laughed. Dude, that crushed me. Sometimes rejection is either projection, a psychological projection from somebody's own insecurities, negative emotions, or it's protection from someone or something that's not meant to be in your life anymore. Rock bottom is the beginning of your biggest breakthrough in life a lot of times. Sometimes our most powerful wisdom comes from our most painful seasons in life. And I was a top 100 athlete in the nation. People know Draymond Green from Golden State Warriors. He was #1 my senior year in our state, and I was #3. Everyone thought that I was going to play in the next level, which I would have had I not got hurt. For me, sports wasn't what I did. It was who I was. Losing sports felt like I lost me. Never judge yesterday with today's wisdom. That's a recipe for depression.
So how I discovered you over a little over a year ago was through your TED Talk with over 2 million views. And it was actually cool. We actually used a clip from it back in the day. And so to be doing this podcast with you is it's pretty cool. It's pretty full circle. So my first question for you is, let's say that I was giving a TED Talk, let's say in maybe a month. What would your tips be for me in order to make sure that I give the best speech possible? So when the time comes, I kill it.
You need more than a month.
There we go.
So,
but how long do you need?
How great do you want to be? You know, like greatness takes time. It depends on your skill level, how much speaking experience you have, how much knowledge of the tech culture that you have. But let's say let's say you've got some reps in the game, you've done some speaking, you're not a beginner. Let's say that you know the TED culture enough to kind of, you watch some TED Talks before, you kind of get it. You maybe went to the website and checked out kind of the format. So like you're not starting from scratch. And you secure an opportunity, you got invited to an opportunity and you're like, man, I've got 30 days to dial it in, right? At that point, I would recommend that you already have kind of a script and maybe I can help you in your delivery. I would recommend 3 months to develop a TEDx talk, okay? The first thing you're going to need is a very clear idea worth spreading. Okay, a very clear idea worth spreading. TEDx talks are not about keynotes, not about motivational speeches. They're not even solely about stories, unless you have like a life unbelievable story, like you got saved from, being eaten and swallowed by a whale by Eskimos. Like if your story's that like crazy and unique, then yeah, like that'll be enough. But if it's just like I've overcome some stuff in my life and obstacles, then that's like, so have we all. And so while that's a key component of it, it's not about that. It's not about keynotes. It is about ideas. An idea is a concept. Okay. Let me break that down because that's usually a hard one for people to understand. So originally when I was going to do my TEDx talk, I wanted to do it on athlete transition. Okay. I wanted to talk about the statistics that we see of athletes who play at a high level, don't make it to the next level, and kind of what are some things that they can do to transition more fully into the next life. I was getting ready to come out with my book, so it just made sense, right? And part of when I started to work with a coach is he was telling me about the difference between a talk and an idea. And I was like, well, what is a concept within that has more mass appeal? You got to think at a minimum, you're getting exposure to 37 million person audience. And so what is an idea within the talk, a concept? And so, okay, when I looked at, hey, what really happens in the athlete transition phase? What are the emotions that they really are facing? As I drilled kind of 5, 6, 7 layers deep into that, what I found through that and my life story is that rejection was a common theme. And so I developed the idea. So it went from athlete transition to talk to an idea that rejection is not our enemy, but it is our friend. Okay. That's an example. And I unpacked that and proved that within my talk. So that would be my first thing, is you need a clear idea worth spreading. Okay. Let me know if you want me to pause there. We can riff on that or whatever.
Yeah. So my next question is, I mean, obviously you could have the best idea in the world. You could have the most interesting stories in the world, but it doesn't matter if your delivery sucks, right? So how do you work on that delivery to make your points clearer and to stimulate emotions in your audience?
Yeah, for me, I bring people through like a 4-month process, okay? But let me try to condense it for you and give the audience some takeaways. The first thing is you got to develop your unique style, okay? A lot of reasons why people are rigid in their delivery is because they're rigid in their identity, okay? A lot of the reasons why people are rigid in their delivery is because they're rigid in their identity. They're unclear. They're kind of like a little bit of Jack Welch, a little bit of Tom Bilyeu, a little bit of Eric Thomas, a little bit of Les Brown, a little bit of Sharon Lecter, a little bit of Priscilla. Like they're a little bit of all the models that they see, and they're not enough of themselves. And so part of being better at delivery is start to monitor the conversations that you have with your friends where there's the most safety and trust built. And when you start to see your communication cadence and your style with your friend group, you want to seek to be more of that within your public speaking. Okay. And this is one of those things where it's better to record yourself, even if you just have an iPhone and it's just like terrible audio, but you can at least observe yourself because it's hard to read the label when you're inside the bottle. And we all have blind spots. So a lot of times people are like, well, I'm authentic. I feel comfortable on stage, but then I watch them with their friends where they feel safe and trust, and they're completely different than the persona that they give on stage. And the opportunity to master the delivery is to be the same person in public that you are in private. Okay. And that's where your natural style comes out. That's where your true personality comes out. That's where you start to see your uniqueness versus what you've learned from modeling from other people. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with modeling from other people, but that's the first thing. So I try to get an observation of them in their most safest environment because that's where I see their personality come to the surface. After we do that, you want to practice your talk, and you want to TEDx talks have to be memorized. And so what you want to do is you want to go through your script and you want to clean up stuff that feels clunky. Okay. A lot of people will just memorize it because it sounds poetic. Like, your pain will become the pathway to your purpose and like all this stuff. And that's good, right? It sounds poetic, but if it doesn't sound natural, like you in the private environment, then your delivery is not going to be as good. Okay. So part of developing a more compelling delivery style is to go through it, and when you start to see like you're tripping over phrases, or maybe something sounds poetic but it doesn't necessarily sound personal or doesn't sound like your unique style, you just change the wording, clean it up, talk it out. Sometimes people have to talk it out in a voice recorder to kind of get a little bit more natural language than when they write it on paper. And you want to play with that, massage that, and make it really, really, really natural so it flows. Okay. Last piece that I'll give you is when we talk about the primary things that moves audience, the most important thing that changes behavior is emotion. Energy in motion. Okay. Super ninja hack, super high level expertise, easier said than done. But here's what you want. In the most compelling talks, you want the energy that you embody to be a direct correlation to the change that you seek within the audience. You want the energy that you embody to be in direct correlation to the change that you seek from the audience. So let's say you want them to feel inspired to change their life. Okay. What does that feel like? What does that feel like? Oh man, it feels like joy. It feels like play. It feels like jumping on a trampoline. And you want to get in touch with the energy of that. Okay. And then how can you cultivate that within yourself first? How can you listen to some music that causes you to feel those emotions? How can you start to do some meditation or some chants or some affirmations to put you in the same energetic match? Because if you cultivate that energy first, you can put it in motion to be able to have the audience have that same energy. Okay. That is what's going to get them to actually take action on the things that you say. That is going to break them out of limbic state and to be open to hear the truths that you're going to share on stage. It is the energy that you step there. Okay. Kind of an advanced thing, but it's a very important thing.
Yeah, something that you mentioned that kind of resonated with me was hearing back. When it comes to delivery, hearing back what you're talking about. I can relate to this. When I started this podcast, I've always been fairly confident in my ability to speak and public speak. And then when I started this podcast, I started to listen back to myself speak. I noticed that there were these little things like little pauses, or just the way I said things. And so it's very important to study yourself in order to know what changes you need to make. And I've already noticed over time, I got better. And over time, if you really study yourself and take inventory on maybe some little mistakes that you're making, because the little mistakes actually really matter in something as little as something as important as public speaking. So my next question for you regarding public speaking obviously the goal of public speaking is to spark the audience, spark emotion in the audience for them to make a change. But from your journey from when you first started to now, what would you say are the biggest changes that you've seen in yourself from your
It's my favorite part, man. I always say that speaking, when done in the right way, when done in the most powerful way, doesn't just impact the audience, it impacts the speaker. Okay, specifically when you're not just teaching what you know, but you're teaching who you are. Okay, everybody teaches what they know. Very few people teach what they do. Even less people teach who they are. Okay. And the reason being is because congruency, transparency. It's easy to teach something that I may not be living out myself. Now, it doesn't make the principle any less true, but it does make the power less potent. Okay. So when I started to speak about who I actually was, the thing that I was actually doing on a consistent basis, the way that I was living my life, what it did was it forced me to evolve. So one of the ways is, I often would develop a message. They say that the medicine that you give to others is often the medicine that you need yourself. And so what I would notice is that when I sought to inspire others, I was sharing with them principles and keys that were helpful for me, that brought me into greater congruency with the way that I was living. So when I started talking about marriage, or I started talking about mental health, I would have to show up as a better husband in my marriage. I'd have to show up as a person who took time for self-care and actually did the things that I actually was preaching. And so what that did is it started to improve my life. And one of the biggest changes that it's done is it helped me to see myself from an elevated standpoint. So the TEDx talk, I tell this story about being in the 3rd and 5th grade and being teased for being a black kid that quote unquote talks and acts white. And what that did was it taught me that my authentic self wasn't really enough to be liked or loved by other people. And I would always say that I really didn't fit in, et cetera, et cetera. Well, part of what happened when I started to share my story and inspire other people is I started to build a bigger brand, make a bigger impact, increase my confidence. I became this version of myself that didn't identify with the story that I told myself. I'll say that again. I became a version of myself that didn't identify with the story that I told myself. So part of it was I realized, hey, I wasn't this kid that didn't fit in. I wasn't this kid who wasn't enough to lead and be liked by other people. I was the same person that I am today. I just didn't see myself that way. I wasn't being that way. I wasn't showing up with that confidence, but it was always in the inside. And now that I built this brand and I'm a public speaker and inspiring people, it's like, whoa, it caused me to divorce that old story. Speaking gave me that gift. And I believe when we speak in congruency with who we are, it'll be the same gift to other people.
Yeah, so the theme of this TED Talk is rejection, and I think it's very, very helpful for some people to study other people's stories and find out what rejections they went through, what failures they went through, because it makes you, the most successful people, they all go through that, but it makes you realize that you're not any worse because you've been through rejections or failures. It's actually just a part of the process. So I think it's very, very helpful to almost look around at other people too. So when you go through those rejections, you realize that it's not the end of the world and that everyone goes through them. So with that being said, what would you say are some of the biggest rejections that you faced in your life?
Funny story. I'll tell you something I don't even tell often. When I was in the 5th grade, there was this girl that I liked. Her name was Elizabeth. She was this redhead girl. And I don't know why I thought she was smoking hot, man. and I'm a romantic. And anytime when you are romantic, it causes your heart to open. So, and I grew up, and I didn't have a lot of money growing up, so part of the story might mess it up, but this is the actual story. So I go to Myers, which is like a supermarket in Michigan, and I see the flowers, this fancy box of chocolate. I remember it was a lot of money to me then. The box of chocolate was like $50. The flowers were like $50, $60. So I bought the flowers, then I stole the chocolate.
Wow. Wow.
In the card. I got stole a card too. The card was like $7. Put it underneath my like hoodie or whatever I was wearing. I walked out with it. Go to school and I give it to her, and I write on the note like a bunch of poetic stuff, but on the front of the card I wrote, "Elizabeth, will you be mine?" And I waited till everybody in 5th grade gave out their little sugary snacks, and then I went up to her, made a spectacle of it, because I was for sure that I was going to get this girlfriend in front of everybody. And I said, "Elizabeth, will you be mine?" And she did not hesitate. She said no in front of the whole class, and they laughed. Dude, that crushed me. My heart closed. Fast forward, I'll give you another one. A lot of women wounds for me. I was dating this girl in high school, and she was like the freshman that everybody wanted to date. I'm like, man, I'm gonna date her. We were dating, and we were dating for several months, and I was going to meet her parents. And when I went over there, I knew something was off, and I couldn't tell what it was. So I met her parents. Long story short, about 2 months after that, I'm talking to one of my track teammates, and they called me and they said, "Hey man, you know that freshman?" Enter her name blank. It's like, "Yeah, man, what about her?" It's like, "Oh man, I had sex with her last week." And I was like, "Oh." And I played it off, and I was like, "Oh man, me too." You know, I didn't tell her it was my girlfriend. Dude, that crushed me. So when you talk about rejection, things that make you question your worth, things that make you feel like you're not good enough, like something's wrong with you, like I gave my everything, but the reciprocity of that was pain, not love. It caused me to kind of cut off part of myself. Like I made an inner vow, like I'll never be romantic again. I'll never give my heart to another woman again. And that took me years to get over, man, till I finally healed and opened up.
Yeah, and watching one of your videos, you mentioned one of your friends said, when you lose, don't lose the lesson. So
Yes.
from the 2 stories that you just gave, what would you say is the biggest lessons from those stories that made that resonated with you at a young age?
Yeah, well, part of it is what I shared in the TEDx talk was that rejection isn't something to be ashamed of. That rejection isn't something to make you question yourself. That sometimes rejection is either projection, a psychological projection from somebody's own insecurities, negative emotions, or it's protection from someone or something that's not meant to be in your life anymore. And in both of those scenarios, I see that those paradigms playing out. Those girls didn't love themselves enough to be faithful to me. They weren't secure in themselves to give me the security that I was looking to get back. It had nothing to do with something being wrong with me. It had everything to do with their own brokenness. And that's not like meaning I'm perfect or anything, but that's just the correct way to interpret that situation versus internalize pain that isn't mine to keep. And so the lesson that I learned is that, man, you can process rejection from a healthy standpoint, from a different vantage point. And you don't have to pick up pain that doesn't belong to you. You don't have to pick up other people's problems that don't belong to you. Somebody else's reality doesn't have to become yours. And that was a healing process for me. And those were very powerful lessons that still continue to serve me today. That being protection is obviously the wife that I have now is better than any of them ever could have been. And not just better from like, like more beautiful or like smarter, but just like fits the life that I was called to live. Okay. And they don't. And so, that's something to think of. If you get rejected, your clients, you might not get the clients that you think you want. You might not get the job that you think you need. You might not have the position that you think you should have, but know that sometimes that's protecting you for something or someone better.
Yeah, you have to give it time because you truly don't know how something's going to play out until maybe years or decades down the line when, like you said, your wife, when you realize, oh, wait a second, it was actually working out to work out in my favor at the end. And not only that, the lessons that you learned from those rejections, I bet contributed to the relationship you have now. Is that correct?
Oh, totally, man. Totally. There's so many times where like my wife's not in the mood or, she's not feeling me like I want her to feel me. And I don't take it personal. I'm like, man, she's just going through her thing. She's just, if the old me would have been like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? I need to go do some push-ups or like something like that. And it's everything to do with like her busy day or how she's not feeling love within herself. Like it doesn't always have to be something that does with me. And sometimes it is. Sometimes I need to brush my teeth or like pick up the underwear more often or something like that. But more times than not, it's like in her own process.
I just had a thought too. I feel like sometimes, especially and you talked about those moments when you feel almost rejected from your wife, but it's actually because maybe she's tired or something like that. It's important to understand maybe times in your life that you almost reject people in a way, but like you don't mean to. It's because and so you have to understand that it's hard to understand what the other person's going through when they don't tell you exactly. And we can kind of internalize how they treat us based on that, when the reality is maybe they're just tired. Maybe they're in a bad mood. So you're no stranger to rock bottom, and I suggest anyone who hasn't seen Darryll's TED Talk to go ahead and watch that after this video. Maybe I'll leave it in the description. Let's say someone watching this recently went through a rock bottom moment, or they're in rock bottom right now. What would you tell them? What would your advice be?
It depends on the paradigm they're in. A lot of people live in a linear progression of time, which is a man-made construct, but life isn't actually linear. It's actually it's multi-dimensional, okay? And that's an important distinction to make, because if you think of it that way, the alpha and omega, the beginning and the end, the pain and the power are two sides of the same coin. So rock bottom is the beginning of your biggest breakthrough in life a lot of times, right? We say it this way, so sometimes our most powerful wisdom comes from our most painful seasons in life. Okay. And if we look back on our lives and we say, man, what really helped you to grow? What really helped you to evolve? Yeah, there's these amazing experiences. I went to college. I played sports. I was a top 100 athlete. And I got rejected by this girl that taught me this valuable lesson. I grew up in the hood and encountered a lot of trials that taught me resilience and taught me things like the pain in my life actually produced some of the most potent power. And so I would tell that person that is true for you, whether you feel like it or not. And the opportunity is to start to look at what is the lesson that this trial is showing me. What is the character that this challenge is developing in me? And maybe if you can get more focused on the character that's being developed, on the lesson that's being cultivated, maybe your focus would change what you are experiencing, would change how you're experiencing the pain. Not that the situation will change immediately, but that you will change in the situation. And if you look no further than like Nelson Mandela, who sat in prison with the most joy than normal people, average everyday people have, because his circumstances weren't good, but his mindset was. And that is what I would challenge people to think in the middle of crisis.
Yeah, and I think this kind of relates a little bit to what we just talked about too, is sometimes it's hard to, when you're going through those moments, it's hard to see it right away, the character development, because I mean, the emotions are taking over, especially if it's like raw and like it just happened. And so sometimes the secret ingredients is just you need some more time to pass, and then you'll see that character development over time. And that's when you look back and realize that, see how far you've come. Something that I like to do if I'm maybe, I don't know, if those emotions are taking over, something I like to do is think about another thing that happened in the past that I got over and developed from, and be like, oh wait, same thing's going to happen this time. So I would say that you got a second chance, during that time, maybe when you're at rock bottom or shortly after. Are there any stories of someone else that got a second chance that inspired you at all?
Tons, man. I binged YouTube so much because it was like those stories fed me I needed to hear it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And that's the thing, man. Sometimes we think it's like about a one or done, and it's not. Like, we have to renew our mind. We have to continue to feed our mind that positivity to create new subconscious patterns within our brains. And so, like, the stories, probably, you know, a lot of people say I sound like a little bit like Eric Thomas and a little bit like Bishop Jakes. And the reason why is because I listened to thousands of their videos. So when I listened to Eric Thomas talked about how he ate out of trash cans and lived in abandoned buildings, man, it encouraged me when I felt like I was suicidal and worthless in society. When I heard Bishop Jakes talk about he preached with holes in the bottom of his shoes, and he was so insecure to speak that he would shake and sweat profusely, and he would shake so bad that he had to have them put the microphone on the stand so that he can hold the microphone or the podium, and the mic wouldn't shake and they wouldn't hear that feedback in the microphone. When I heard that in a season when I was so insecure to speak in front of people, I would fake like I had to go to the bathroom during icebreakers so that they wouldn't call on me. And I saw myself in their stories, and I said, man, if Bishop Jakes, being one of the greatest orators of our time, struggled so much with his insecurity, then man, there is potentially a calling for me to do this. There is potentially hope for me to do this, because they can do it, then I can do it too. And those are just few of the many, 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 many stories that I heard that just fed me, man. But through those two communicators, man, they have made such a great impact on my life.
Yeah, you have a book called Who Am I After Sports, and it's basically about what someone who has their identity attached to sports and the identity is crushed, how to move on from that. So before we go into maybe tips for people that might be in a similar situation, what's your story regarding your transition to you played football, correct, and to what you're doing now, public speaking? What was your story behind that?
Well, yeah, man, I was a top 100 athlete in the nation. A lot of people know I played basketball as well. So I always tell people, like, you know, in terms of athleticism, you know, people know Draymond Green from Golden State Warriors. He was number 1 my senior year in our state, and I was number 3. And so I was very talented, very athletic. And, you know, everyone thought that I was going to play in the next level, which I would have had I not got hurt. So going into like towards the middle / end of my freshman year in college, I had a back injury, a double laminectomy surgery, that should have ended my career. But for me, sports wasn't what I did. It was who I was. My identity was attached to something externally. It wasn't something that I cultivated internally. And so I couldn't let go of it. And I begged the coaches to let me come back, and I signed a liability waiver, and I rehabilitated my body within 6 months to earn a starting position as a defensive end. And I did so primarily because of opioids. I started taking so many of them to numb my pain, to play the game of sports. And my body was failing me, and I just kept doing, you know, epidural injections and chiropractic and physical therapy and nerve killings and like all this stuff to just numb the pain to continue to play the game. Because I thought, like, if I just get this NFL contract, I'll get a big check. I can hire like the world's best specialists. They can heal my back, and I can like be rich, famous, and successful. And that time just never came, man. I was taking so many opioids that they were thinning my blood to the point where every time I made contact on the field, my nose would bleed. And the coaches saw that something was going on. I was having all these frequent nosebleeds during games and at practices. And they kicked me off the team going into my senior year, at the end of my junior year. And, man, that crushed me. A lot of my friendships was built on my athletic success. Most of my support system was built because I was an athlete. And I always tell people, like, surround yourself with people who love you for you, not just for your gift. And I didn't have that at the time, other than my family, who I couldn't receive love from because I thought that they loved me just because they had to. And, you know, losing sports felt like I lost me. And I didn't think that I would be fulfilled by anything other than athletics. There was nothing that I thought would replace the adrenaline rush, the fulfillment I felt, the level of domination I felt. And so I just got depressed, man. I stopped eating. Went from 275 pounds to 219 pounds in 4 weeks. And I started making all these attempts to end my life. And I ended up in a psychiatric facility in Detroit, Michigan. And it was there I had a life-changing experience, man. I found my faith. I saw my first counselor. I saw my first psychiatrist. I did my first mindfulness exercise. And I started to see that, man, I can build my life from the inside out, not the outside in. And it began a journey for me, man. It was a healing moment. And I came out of that place like Clark Kent becomes Superman, and started this journey of really healing and becoming everything that I've been today.
So these major life changes or disappointments are inevitable for everyone. So what would you say, how do we move forward from them and move forward with our lives after these major life changes or disappointments?
Yeah, number one is we have to be honest about how we feel and about what we're struggling with. I talk with the word that we throw around a lot is vulnerability. I tell people that vulnerability is like a Batman signal for love. The more vulnerable you are, the more it shines that Batman signal to let love know it needs to rush in. And so part of that crash and burn season for me, I would put stuff out on Facebook like, for every dark night, there's a brighter day. And I was really looking for help. And when people wouldn't respond like, oh man, call me or check on me, see if everything's okay, I got even more depressed because I'm like, no one cares. But when I review that season, I wasn't really being vulnerable enough. I wasn't telling people I was having suicidal thoughts. I wasn't telling people that I was trying to overdose on opioids. And so if I wanted more love, I had the opportunity to be more vulnerable. So it starts there. Be transparent, be honest, talk about the struggle, not in a woe is me way, but in an honest way. It starts there. The second thing is we as society have to slow down enough to ask tough questions. We have to stop settling for people's gifts and not knowing the person. There's so much stuff out there that the moment an athlete does something, or the moment that somebody who has a large personal brand does something, we just throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't treat them as humans. We don't give them the same grace that we need. And I think it's backwards. So I think that's an opportunity to really change this narrative. So be transparent, change the paradigm in which we treat leaders and people who are highly gifted. And the other piece of that is to normalize mental health, man. Like, stop making it a stigma. Stop apologizing for being emotional. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. Every time someone gets ready to cry on a podcast or speaking engagement, I'm sorry. And they apologize for something that should be celebrated and embraced. So changing the stigma, we have to change our reaction. And so, man, those are just a few things, man, that would really help.
How do we become more vulnerable in general? So how do you go from, like you just talked about, almost being shut off from it, and not being vulnerable, to being at the point now where you're in front of thousands of people giving these speeches? So how do we become more vulnerable in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah. Number one, you have to process your pain. Unprocessed pain becomes ill-processed pain. So what that means, a lot of times when painful things happen in our life, a lot of times we will bottle it up and we just keep on going. And we think that if I don't think about it, I don't give energy to it, and it'll go away. What really happens is whatever we don't express, we suppress. It starts to live in our cellular memory, and it starts to show up in different ways. Outbursts of anger, irritability, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it starts with processing, okay? Counseling is a way to process. Therapy is seeing a therapist is a way to process. Journaling is a way to process. I always teach this journaling process of write down painful. You can either start with painful seasons of your life, right? A relationship, mom-dad issues, or you can start with like just everyday stuff. Like yesterday, somebody got on my nerves. I got cut off in traffic. Okay. You want to write down what happened. How did I feel about what happened? This is emotional intelligence. Feel. It has to be feelings. What happened? How did I feel about what happened? What could that mean? Keyword is could, meaning a detachment from your own perspective. What could that have mean? Okay. And then the fourth question is, what else could that mean? and you're looking to answer the question from a vantage point of a mentor or friend or a grandma or a wise sage. Sometimes it's like, you know, if you're a person of faith, what would your faith say? What would your pastor say? What would your, monk say? Like whatever it is for you. And so, what happened? How did you feel about what happened? What could that mean? What else could that mean? Okay, is a journaling process that can help to process that stuff. Now, when you start to process it, it loses its power a little bit because you gain new perspective, you get it off your chest, and now it's easier to talk about, okay? And that is how you can start to open up, be more vulnerable because you've processed in private, so it's easier to talk about in public.
Yeah, I think it's important to start small, not just going straight to the stage with thousands of people, to starting small with maybe telling one person, maybe telling your family, then moving on to friends. And then I think, because going to that big stage right away is just too intimidating, or even posting it on social media. And I think a lot of people, this is something I see a lot too with people my age, is they express all this stuff on social media. They're vulnerable on social media, but are they having the same conversation with their mom? Are they having the same conversation with their sister, with their friends? And so that's important too, is to have those vulnerable conversations with the people closest with you, because those are the people that need to hear it the most. Not
Totally. I think
around.
wherever there's a place of ease, go with that. Like if it's easier to talk to a brother or friend, etc., like then go with that, like, and then build it up. And for me personally, honestly, the audience has helped me a lot. It was way more hard for me to be vulnerable in with people I love because I cared about their opinion deeply. Whereas like I spoke on stage, I might not ever see these people again. I'm just going to let it rip. So, as long as they're not recording it. Now, recording is a whole different story. But, I actually healed from sharing publicly in audiences.
Yeah, I think when you're vulnerable with those people that are closest with you too, it also deepens that connection with them, right?
Totally.
Yeah. So another big factor in people's lives is how they compare themselves with other people. How do we, and everyone deals with these comparisons, right? We're always looking at what other people, almost make ourselves feel worse when we compare ourselves to other people that so and so are farther ahead than us. How do we deal with these comparisons? Because I feel like it's holding so many people back.
Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
How do we deal with them? We stop dealing with them. I heard this pastor say one time, he's like, you want to defeat the devil, just don't get in the ring. And it's like the same thing with comparison. Like, don't even entertain it. Like, the moment you start catching yourself doing it, just stop it. Okay. The other thing too is to get so deeply connected with yourself. Once you know who you are, you won't struggle with comparison, imposter syndrome, and anything of the like, because you know you so well that, like it's like looking at your fingerprint and you're not worried about it comparing it to another fingerprint because it's that unique. Most people don't know their fingerprint, and that is why they struggle with comparison. And I was like that for a long time. It took me 5.5 years, man, to really like get to this place where I know myself, I love myself, and that pressure to feel like an imposter or feel less confident because of comparison was just not there anymore.
I think it's important to understand that you said it's important to know yourself, but it's also important to understand that you don't really know these other people. So something I've heard before is I heard this, I forget where I heard this, but someone said the people that you are admiring could secretly be miserable.
Oh, no,
know that. So people are making comparisons that might not even be true. It's just what they're perceiving of the other person.
Never compare your real life to someone else's highlight reel, right?
Exactly, yes.
Like, I'll tell you a quick story on that one because I think it'll help people see. I had this best friend, and him and his wife were like they were the type of couple that like they did, like they were, how they say opposites attract? Well, these people were similar. Yeah. Like they did everything together. They liked all the same music. They liked all the same shows. So their marriage was like, they were always like best friends, playing and joy and pictures and laughter and fun. And me and my wife are opposites. And so we were like struggling. We go to date night. She wants to do something different than what I want to do. And it was awkward. So I remember like me and my wife being in this argument, and I go to social media and I look on their page, and they were having a blast. They were out to dinner. And I remember just sitting there thinking like, man, I wish I could have a night like that. And I kid you not, true story. I couldn't even finish the thought. He called me and he's like, hey man, you got a second? I'm like, yeah, bro, what's up? He was like, man, I'm so tired of this B, da 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 da. She always getting on my nerves, and da 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 da. And he's like going ham, and I was like, I literally said, yo, what happened? I just looked on your social, and y'all was doing fine, bro. He's like, man, that stuff is for the gram. And I was like, see, this is why you can't compare your real life to someone else's highlight reel. You just don't know. You just don't know, man. And so
you also need to understand too, it's are you putting your bad stuff out there? No, you're also putting your highlight reel out there. Also too, it's like just because someone has more money than you, just because they seem like they're in a better relationship, doesn't mean they're happier than you. You don't know that unless you don't know them personally. So I love that story that you just said.
Oh, totally. And realize that if they did have more money than you and they were happy, that there's enough happiness, there's enough joy, there's enough money to go around, that no one should live in lack lest they so desire. I don't know if you know David Meltzer or not, but
actually, yeah, I'm on the podcast recently.
Actually. Oh, dope. So he might have said this on the podcast, but he's the one he's like, Darryll, there's three types of paradigms to live in. There's three types of people. He said people that have not enough, people that live in a world of just enough, and people that live in a world of more than enough. And he's like, it's all based upon their paradigm. And so, this whole comparison thing is a world of not enough or just enough. This whole thing of like, hey, somebody that has more money than me, they might not be as happy as me, is kind of a world of not enough. But in the world of more than enough, it doesn't matter how much happiness you have. It doesn't matter how much joy you have. It doesn't matter how good your relationship is. It doesn't matter how much money you have. There's still enough for me to have the same amount of joy, relationship quality, and wealth that I desire, because we live in a world of more than enough.
What would you say are the biggest mistakes that you made in your 20s that you could go back and change if you could?
Wow, the biggest mistakes. And I like that question. Usually the question is like, what would you tell your younger self or something like that?
That's coming up next. So
is it really? Okay, cool. The biggest question that are the biggest mistakes I've made in my 20s. I think not understanding the amount of power I had over my own reality, not understanding consciousness at all, playing way too small, man. I wasted years in my 20s just playing small, even the first couple of years of my 30s, like just playing small, just like, you know what? I did this amount of revenue last year. I'm going to do a little bit more next year. I want to write my book in 12 months. Like just these small goals. I want to close my first client. Like and I get it as stepping stones, but like it takes, I remember Myron Goldman told me this. He says, Darryll, it's actually easier to make a lot of money in a little bit of time than it is to make a little bit of money over a long period of time. And I was like, no way. But then when I thought about it, it was easier to do it that way. And it was a paradigm shifter, man. So I wish I would have played bigger. I wish I would have been more conscious. And I say that I have to follow it up with this. Never judge yesterday with today's wisdom. That's a recipe for depression. I'm grateful for the former self, but I did the best I could with what I knew. Yeah.
So my last question is, what would you tell your younger self?
Don't be afraid. Don't allow fear to talk you out of something you should talk yourself into. Do it afraid. Walk toward fear, not away from it. Go bigger, and then go bigger than bigger. Love yourself. Give yourself the same grace that you give to other people. And value every precious moment of life.